Your magnum opus of HTML and CSS projects for our time at GLT. And today we're going to be making a quick little mental health tracker. So here's a quick little example that I coded up before. So the idea is we take a quiz, and based on the answers we can see the history of our answers going as far back as possible. So if I were to click take quiz, a pop-up shows up and I can select today's date from a calendar select. I can select one of these buttons, and eventually I can type something in, and when I hit submit, it adds a new record to this table that'll keep being appended to as time goes on. So that's our goal for today. I'm going to try and keep this video under 45 minutes, just so you guys can not spend too much time watching me talk and code. So let's get started. So here you should have a starter code that I will have given you, and let's go over what's in here. So we have our basic HTML starter stuff that we talked about before. I changed this title tag so that the tab name, if I open a new tab, the tab name says Sahas's MH Tracker, but I changed mine to MH Tracker for you guys. And then I also have some stuff here where I included Google fonts, so we can play around with things like this that aren't built into your browser. And I have a style sheet here, which if you take a look at it, is just stuff for the pop-up. So modals are pop-up, so they're essentially the same thing. And if we scroll down further, we see script tags with the onload function with nothing in it, and we will see the basic structure of our pop-up. So this window onload function, this represents all the JavaScript that gets run as soon as all the HTML components are rendered. So things like assigning onloads to components, or interacting with elements. That's what you would do in the onload. Alright, so let's get started. First thing I'm going to do is try and make the basic structure, right? So I need to create the title. I need to create this button that I can hover and it'll change color. And then I need to make this basic table. Okay, so first thing, H1 for our title, and you can put the titles whatever you want. I'll make it Sahas's mental health tracker, and I'm going to add a button. So this button will be just like that, button, and it'll have an ID of, I don't know, quiz page or quiz pop-up button, like that, and that's it. And then inside the text is take quiz, like that. So I'm just going to save what I have, and I'm going to run what I have to make sure that everything is working. So I'm going to save what I have, right click, and open with live server. So there we go. Alright, so here's my H1, and here's my take quiz button that doesn't do anything. Okay, so now let's try and make our table. So tables in JavaScript are a little bit confusing, but in HTML are a little bit confusing, but I'll try and make it as simple as possible. So a table tag is split into four sorts of tags. You have the table tag that surrounds the entire table. You have the table row tag, which represents a row in the table. And you also have a th tag, which represents, a cell, which is like the column header, or I think the proper term is table header. And there's also a TD. TD stands for table data, I believe. And these four tags make up what a table is. So just to show you, so we have a date table header, we have a I don't know, overall table header, a stress table header, and I'm just going to write all of them out that we're going to eventually need. So date, overall, stress, anxiety, daily, satisfaction. I don't know, at this point I was just trying to get as many as possible just to show you. So I encourage you to change what these are in yours. I want you to make this personal, but if this is your first time following along, then I suggest following what I'm doing and then making modifications later. Alright, so I'm going to have a row of title headers, and I'm going to have a bunch of data in each of these. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 table headers, so I'll need 6 table datas. So I'll say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, missing 1, 6. So if I save it, and now I have my table. Right? But this table doesn't really look like a table. It's there's no border, right? It doesn't look like it's graphed or anything. So let's do that. Let's add a border. So let's go into our styles.css, and above all this I'm going to make a little bit of space, and here I'm going to add some styles. So the styles that I'm going to add are going to target, let me pull up my reference. So the table will spread across the entire page like that, and so I'll go over what border collapses. It'll make, actually I'll show border collapse later. So it's going to span the entire width, and I'm going to have the table datas and the table headers. They're going to have a border of 1 pixel that's solid, and the color will be black, like that. So if I save it, and let's also I'll do this just to show you guys what happens, right? So if I put a border around everything, then it looks like everything has a double border around it, right? So we don't necessarily want that all the time, and maybe we only want one line to represent the separation, so that's where border collapse comes in. So if I go border collapse with the dash in the middle, and I say border dash collapse and collapse, like that. Oh, I forgot a semicolon here, so couldn't tell the difference. Right? So now it collapsed the borders into single lines. Okay. So what I'm going to do is, instead of having a border around everything, I'm just going to have horizontal borders that, that go across the side. I'm not going to have these vertical ones. And to do that, all we would do is, instead of having a border across everything, we will set the border on the bottom to be 1 pixel solid and black. And now we have like a row. Okay, so that's one thing down. Maybe another thing we want to do is center the stuff inside the cells, right? So another thing I'm going to style inside of here will be text align center, like that. And now everything is centered inside the row. Okay. And I'm also going to, I'll change it later. So I was going to change the font now. But now I'm going to show you what happens if I take out each one of these. So if I take out the table, nothing changes. If I take out the TD, which is the table data in this select, then I save it, and now the rows of table datas don't have borders underneath them. And if I were to do the same thing but with the Now there's no separation between the title headers and the title data. Okay, so those are some basic styling for tables. Next, I'm going to show you the hover. So what if I want to do the thing where if I hover over a row, that entire row highlights? So you can see, you can easily point out what are the values for the current row that you're looking at, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to target the table row when it's hovered, right? So this colon hover means that it'll only style when the mouse is hovering over the component. So if I hover over a table row, what I want to do is I want to set the background color to some version of gray. So I'm going to do F5, 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 and it'll be like a very light gray, right? So if I hover over it, it'll turn gray. If I hover over this, it'll also turn gray. So right, that's okay. So now I'm going to style this button. So the button that I want to style will have a ID. So ID of quiz pop-up button, right? So if we remember how to target IDs, it's the hashtag. So a hash, and then the ID name, and curly brackets. Right, so what we want is we don't want a border like that. So that gets rid of that little border thing that we had. We want some padding so that there's a little bit of space between the actual text and the edge of the box. So I'll add a bit of space with padding. So on the top I want 20 pixels. To the east I want 10 pixels. To the south I want 20 pixels. And to the west I'll take 10 pixels. Like that. So if I save this, it didn't work. Let me reload. Oh, I forgot one thing. Display block, like that. Nope. It's interesting. If I save it, oh, I forgot to, oh no, it's here. 2010, 2010. No. Oh, okay. So it looks like the issue was I had commas in between all this. So I had it like this before. And when that happens, it's not valid CSS, so it just ignored that line. So I need to take out the commas here. That was my bad. All right. So I want this to be centered. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add margin auto, like that. And what margin auto does is it automatically balances the left and right margins so that the element is centered. So if I go to inspect element here, right click inspect element, and then I click the inspect element button and I hover over it, you can see that the orange things on the left and right represent the margin, and they're equally spaced on the left and right. Okay. Another thing I'm going to add is a background color. We don't want that weird gray, so our background color, I'm going to choose a nice shade of blue, like that. So if you want to choose your own color, what I would suggest is just putting some random value and then hovering over this, and you can select whatever color you want. So I'm going to go back to the number that I chose earlier. So that would 3264D0, right? So when the color is that dark, we probably want white text. So I'll change the text color with the color attribute. So the color is white. We save it, and the text is now white. Okay. Let's add a little bit of roundedness to the corners. So that would be done with border radius. I'll give it a 15 pixel radius on each corner, and that's nice. And let's change the font family to be Roboto. That's a famous font by Google. And if Roboto isn't available to your browser, I'm going to default to sans serif, which is a default HTML font that every single browser has. Whoops, sans serif, like that. So save it, and there we go. Change the font, maybe you didn't notice. And font size, I'm going to give it 25 pixels, so it's a lot bigger. Nice. And I'm going to give it a longer width, maybe 250 pixels, like that. And that looks like a proper button. Okay, so now let's style this big header here. So we're going to change the font of it. We're going to center it. We might even change the size of it. All right, so we'll go to the H1 tag that we had here, and we're going to give it an ID so that we can style it. So I'm going to give it page title, page dash title. All right, and in styles.css, I'm going to target page title. So I want the text to be centered. I want the font size to be 50 pixels. I'll make the font family be Dosis, which is another font I found on Google, and it will be sans serif by default. So if I save it, there we go. Here's my header, here's my button I can click that does nothing, and here's my table. Okay, maybe I want a little bit of space in between this table and this button, right? Because having them right on top of each other is a little bit annoying. So on my table tag here, I'm going to add a margin top, I'll say 150 pixels. And what that does is it puts 150 pixels between whatever element was on top. But 150 looks a little big, so I'm just going to say 120 for now. Okay, that works. All right, so now I have all the basic elements for that front page. Now let's try and make it so that if I click, before we do that, let's make it so if we hover over the button, it changes color a bit. And to do that, kind of like how we hovered over table rows, we're going to hover over the pop-up button. So target the quiz pop-up button. And we, on the hover, we're going to set the background color to a slightly darker shade. Oh, how did this change? This was hash 3264D0. And here, background color will be 0045D8. So nice little darker shade of blue. And now if I hover over it, it turns a little bit darker. Sweet. Okay, so now we need to set so that when we click this, it'll actually open this modal thing, or the pop-up. So that's going to be in our script tags, and what we're going to do is we're going to target the close button so it closes. We're going to target this button so it opens, and we're going to have essentially 2 or 3 on-click handlers. I think it's 2 on-click handlers, but 3 variables, right? So the first thing that we need is a reference to our opening button, right? So var open button equals document.get element by ID, and we want the quiz pop-up button. So copy that, paste it in here, right? So if you don't remember what this is, this will search through the entire document for an element with the value of this, and we can save it into a variable. And if I were to console.dir this variable, so open button, like that, save it, and I open up the JavaScript console here, it'll show me all the values that this button has, right? So it has if I scroll down, it has an on-click, which we're going to take advantage of. And on this on-click, we're going to show that pop-up, and on the on-click of the other button, we're going to close the pop-up. Okay. So let's take a second here and pause the video, see if you can try and target this div, save it into a variable called modal, all lowercase, and try and target this thing here. So this might be a little bit of a challenge, but see if you can. And if it's too difficult, you can change this to ID and try again. I'll change it to ID. I think it's a little bit easier. Okay, so we have our open button, and now we're going to target the modal. So var modal equals document.get element by ID, and the modal's ID is my modal. So I'm going to put that into here, and now we have that variable. So now the final one we have to do is the close button equals document.get element by ID close. So if you decided to leave this as class, what you would have to do is you'd have to select it by class name, get elements by class name. And since it's a list of elements, you have to get the first element. So kind of like how you get the first character in a string, you get the first element. So I'm just going to leave it as ID and change the get element by ID and get rid of this square bracket. Okay. So now that we have this open button, what we need to do is .onClick. So when the button is clicked, we want it to run a function. So we're going to define a function with function and then parentheses and curly brackets. And in the curly brackets, all I'm going to do is say our modal.style.display equals block. And before I explain what that is, let's move to the close button. So close button.onClick, just like we did up there, equals function, just like we did up there. And then again, modal.style.display equals none. And let's just make sure that this works. So if I hit take quiz and if I hit this X, it closes. Sweet. So what this is doing, this modal style display block, is we're accessing the style attributes of the modal. So almost like we're editing the CSS with JavaScript, and we're setting the display value to be block. So you've seen display block up here. You can think of it as just something like an H1 or some element that, you know, doesn't really wrap around if you place multiple elements. It's one of the ways that elements are displayed. And what we're doing is when we open it, we're setting it to block, and when we close it, we are setting it to none. And what none means is that it's not going to show. So either we show it or we don't. And that's what these two buttons are toggling. And that's how we can open and close. Cool. All right, so the next step is to make our little form, right? So when we open up this this pop-up, we need to show a little form that has a bunch of questions that we want answered. So to do that, we're going to go inside of our modal, and beneath this close button, we're going to add a form. So a form tag allows you certain privileges in JavaScript. So it gives you a few useful things when it comes to inputs and entering data. So for example, it gives you an easy way to read the data when the form is submitted. It gives you a way to verify that it's an email, or that a number that you put in is within a certain range. So that's what it can do, but we won't be going that deep into it. So just for now, we're going to make 5 questions that go over basically these 5 or 6 items. So the way that the form works is everything has a label and everything has an input, or it has some descriptions and things like that. So for getting today's date, we're going to have a label, and it's going to have an attribute called for equals, and for this one I'm just going to say date. Bear with me here. And the name of this label will be today's date, and it's going to be attached to an input of type will be date, and the name will be, I think, today date, and I'm going to change this to be today date just to show you, just to be specific in what each is referring to. So if I save it and run it, now I get like a little label for our input, so I can choose whatever day. There's no submit button or anything yet, but that's fine. So what happens is this input has a name attribute, and when this name attribute matches with a label here, it gives you like a little explanation of what it's almost attached next to your input. So that's useful when you're making something to explain. And if I were to enter another input, type equals, let's say, another date input like that, and I open it, it opens side by side, right? But maybe we want them to be on separate lines, so that's where the BR tag comes in. So BR stands for break, and it breaks the line. And now if I open it, the following items are on the next line. So the next input, I don't want to be a date. I want it to be 5 buttons to choose between 1 to 5. And to do that, I'm going to have maybe a little paragraph tag explaining what this is. So how was your day on a scale from 1 to 5? So see that we're making progress, right? So it's it's like a separate question. So I'll say 1, like that. Cool. So 1, how was your day? And I'm going to have input type equals radio. So radio buttons are buttons that you can only select one of in a set. And I'm going to have a name called overall. So this will be our overall answer here, over here. So name equals overall, and the value will be 1, like that. And right, and we're going to attach a label to this input. So it's label 4 equals 1 and slash label, and the content of that label will just be the number 1. So I'm going to show it, and now we have 1 and then the number, or our button that we can click. So I think this button should be on the opposite side, so all we have to do that is take this label out and put it beneath. Okay. So at this point, we should have 1 button to click, but we need, 5 in order to have this question work, right? So we just need to copy this 5 times. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and change it so this is 4, 2, and this value is 2. We need this to be 3, and this to be 3. Whoops, this has to be 2. This has to be 3, 4, 5. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Like that. Now if I take the quiz, I have a scale of 1 to 5. Nice. So let's do this a couple more times. So I'm just going to copy and paste this for our overall stress, anxiety, and daily satisfaction. So that would be 3 more times. So 1, 2, 3. And I'm going to change the prompt for this. So how's your day on a scale of 1 to 5? Then how was your stress on a scale from 1 to 5? Then how was your anxiety on a scale from 1 to 5? How was your daily satisfaction? Okay. How was your satisfaction? I'm not really sure what that means in this context, but just bear with me here. It's just an example. And right, so we save it and we run it, and now we have our 5 questions. Oh, I forgot to change the numbers here. Let me do that real quick. So 1, whoops, 2, 3. That's it? Just 3? Doesn't make, no. Oh, I have a duplicate. So this is 2, 3, 4, like that. Alright, so 5, 4, 3, 2. So notice when I click all this, instead of being on separate rows, it's only letting me choose from the entire page. And that's because all of these buttons are linked by this name tag. So whatever radio buttons have the same name tag will be in the same set, meaning you can only choose 1 from the same set. So we need to make all of these questions pertain to different sets. So all we have to do that is make sure the name tags for each set is different. So the first one would be overall, this one would be stress, stress. So I'll show you something cool. So if you highlight over something and then you hold Alt and then highlight over another thing, it will allow you to have 3 cursors at once that you can edit multiple lines at the same time. So name equals stress. Alright, so I'm going to do the same thing here. And this is anxiety. I'm going to do the same thing here. And this, whoops. That is satisfaction, like that. Now if I take the quiz, I can choose from the same row, from different rows, and I can't choose from the same row. All right. So now let's try and get a final text thing, which will be like our notes, and then we'll have a submit button. So we'll have another BR tag, we'll have a label, and it will be for, I'll call it notes, and we'll say notes. Then our input will be of type text, meaning that it's an input that we can type into. So let's see what that looks like. Exactly, so we can type into it, we can delete, and that's about all we can do with just an input of type text. So lastly, what we need is a submit button. So the submit buttons are another input, surprisingly, and it's an input of type equals submit, like that. And I'll give this in, actually it should be fine. So I'll save this. And now we have our notes, and then we have a submit here. But this submit kind of looks like it should be on a different line, right? Kind of looks like the submit is attached to the notes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say 5 notes, and I'm going to have a BR, so it's on a separate line. And there we go. So it's now down below. Okay, you can style this up further. You can look at W3 Schools or something like that. This is a very bare bones form. And now we're going to start working on the functionality of the form. So in any form, we would want to be able to submit this form, right? If I submit it here, it looks like it's going back, but really it's, if we go into the console here, and then we take the quiz and we hit submit. Oh, I guess it doesn't show here, but it's actually running into an error. And that error is that it has no idea what to do on submit. So it refreshes the page and it goes back to our original thing. So nothing, we're not out of the weeds yet. So to edit the form submit characteristics, we'll go to the form tag that we have here, and we're going to add a couple attributes to it. The first will be an ID, so that we can play around with selecting the form later. So I'll call it the quiz. And the second attribute that I'm going to give it is the onSubmit. So the onSubmit will run some JavaScript, and for this JavaScript I'm going to run a function called onFormSubmit, then semicolon, and return false. And make sure it's exactly as I have it typed, letter for letter, space for space. Okay. So what this does is it calls a function called onFormSubmit, and then it will stop the quiz from reloading the page. So now if I were to run it, we would still run into an error, but I'm actually kind of curious to see exactly what error we get. So console, take quiz, submit. There, you saw the errors pop up for a second. So I didn't catch them in time, but I'm not going to spend any more time on that. So all right, so let's define this onFormSubmit function. Right? So to define a function, if we remember from earlier, to do that we would say function. The name was onFormSubmit, and the parentheses to say that it's a function, and then the curly brackets. And on the form submit, what we need to do are a few things. We need to hide the pop-up. We need to read the form data. We need to add a row to the table. And we need to save the row for the future. Right? So if we were to, exit out of the page and join it back again, we would want to see the same data, right? So those are our 4 tasks for this on form submit. So the first one is pretty easy, right? It's pretty much exactly what we have here with the modal and this thing. So I'm gonna pretty much just take this this line here, and I'm gonna put it inside of this on form submit. And the reason that we have to, even though we already have it up here, we have to put it down here, is because this is a new function, meaning that we have no access to this variable. So we have to create it and create it from scratch again. And we're going to do modal dot style dot display equals none, and this will hide our pop-up. So if I take the quiz and do this, and I open up the console just to keep an eye if there are any errors, and I run, there, no more errors. And just to prove that there are no more errors, let's do a console.log made it here. So save that, take the quiz again, fill in some random data, and then I'll open the console again and submit, and there we go. We see the made it here, meaning that it got all the way here, meaning that it closed the modal like this. All right, so our next step is to read the form data, right? And the way that we're going to do that is by some jQuery. So we haven't talked about jQuery yet, so I think for this point I'll just do my best to explain what we're doing here. And we're going to create a variable called data, and it's going to be assigned to form dot serialize array, like that. So a quick explanation of what this is doing. This is a jQuery selector to select the form tag. So any form tag, and since we only have one form tag down here, it's going to match this. And we're going to serialize the values. So just to see what data holds, we'll do a console.log of data. So we save it, take the quiz, we'll fill in everything just to see. So 5, 5, 5, 5, nope, click the wrong button. So I'm going to submit, and we'll check the console, and there we go. This is what it printed. So if we look, we have the name of today's date and the value that it holds. We have the name of overall and the value that it holds, stress, anxiety, satisfaction, and I do not believe we have notes, which is interesting. So let's see why we're not getting notes. Oh, I forgot to say name equals notes, like that. So now if I take the quiz again, 22, 5, 5, 4, 3, submit, and then I check the console. There we go. Now we're seeing notes in here. So I just forgot that name thing, so it didn't register as part of the form. Okay, so now we're getting the form data. Now we need to be able to add a row to the table. So to add a row to the table, what I'm going to do is I'm going to call a function to do it for me. And the reason I'm going to create a function, meaning a sequence of JavaScript commands to do it, is because we're going to need this in multiple places, and I don't want to type this 500 times. So I'm just going to say create table record data, and when we give it the data value, it's going to take that value and it's going to create a table row out of it. So let's define that function now. So function, and we called it create table record, and we have a variable that we're accepting called data. So when we have something inside the parentheses, that means if you remember from math when you had some like function f of x equals 3x plus 5, it's kind of like this is a parameter to a function here, right? So depending on what input you put into here, you get a different output, right? So if x is 1, you'll get 8. If x is 10, you'll get 35. So it's kind of like you're affecting parts of the content of the function without actually changing, the exact order of operations and things like that. So hopefully that gives you like a little visual of what we're trying to do. And with a table record, the easiest way to create table records, and believe me, there's thousands of ways, is by adding rows with JavaScript's built-in insert row and insert cell. So let's worry about how we'll do that now. So we first need a reference to the table. So var table equals documents.get element by ID, and we need the quiz history table. So we forgot to give this table an ID, so let's do that now. So ID equals, and I'll call it quiz history. So we'll come back up here, and the ID was quiz history. Whoops. Right. So now that we have the table, we'll say our row equals table.insert row -1. So what this does is it inserts a row at the last possible place. So it'll insert a row at the bottom of the table. And we're getting a reference to that row that was just created and saving it to a variable, which will be useful later. Right. So now we need to fill in this role with values. So we need the date value. We need the overall score. We need the stress score. We need the anxiety score. And we'll also need the, forgetting two more, right? Contentment score. And we'll need the notes value. So we need to fill in all of these into our row. So to do that, we have to say something like var date cell equals row.insert cell, and we want it in the first position, and first would be a 0 because it starts counting from 0. And now we've created a cell at the first possible location in row, and we're getting a reference to it called date cell. And with this date cell, I'm going to say date cell.inner HTML equals data 0.value. So if you remember what the data looked like, I take 1, 2, 3, 4, like that. The data was an array basically, and if we want to access the first item here, we have to do it with square bracket 0, the second item with square brackets 1, and so on and so forth. So that's what this data 0 value is doing. So it's taking what we have here, it's getting the first item, and from this object here, it's getting the value that we have saved for it. So this one was empty, so we just left it empty. Right? And you can see it's sort of created here. It's almost like it created its first cell with nothing in it. But that's okay. We just haven't given it a date that time. All right. So the overall score, so var overall cell equals row.insert cell 1 this time because we want the second item. And we're going to say overall cell.inner HTML equals data 1 this time dot value, meaning that it'll take the second item from that list and put it in there. And we're going to copy this all the way down. So var stress cell equals row dot insert cell 2, and stress cell dot inner HTML equals data 2 dot value. Going to do anxiety, so var anxiety cell equals row dot insert cell 3, and anxiety cell dot inner HTML equals data 3 dot value. Contentment var contentment cell equals row dot insert cell 4, and then contentment cell dot inner HTML equals data 4 dot value. And the notes, I'm going to do var notes cell equals row dot insert cell at 5. I'm going to do notes cell dot inner HTML equals data 5 dot value. All right. So that was a little bit long. Make sure you have all the correct cells attached to the correct data, and that you don't have any of these duplicated. Otherwise, you might have like a missing section and you'll have no idea where it comes from. So let's make sure that what we have is working. So I'll take the quiz. Go 5, 4, 3, 4, whatever this is, and I'll put in tomorrow's date. So submit, and now I have a new entry in the table. Sweet. Okay, but what happens if I keep adding new items into the table? Does it override? Nope, it adds to the end. What happens if I reload the page? Oh, there we go. So it erases and it doesn't remember what should be stored in the table if we refresh it. So we need a way to persist the data past refreshes. So the way that we're going to do that is with local storage. So local storage is in every single type of browser, and it's a way for websites to put little pieces of information that stays in the browser past refreshes. So things like whether you're logged in or not, cookies, you may have heard of them, are stored in local storage. Well, it's like a little subset. It's a little bit more complicated than that. Other things that are generally stored in local storage are like keys that help identify you to whatever server you're connected to. So it's like a utility place, but we're going to be using it to store data. It's not what it's intended for, but it'll work for our purposes. So what we want to do is, so before we go into coding it, I'll show you through the console exactly what it is. So I think Chrome might be the best one for this. So I'm going to open up Chrome really quick. And I'm going to go to localhost 5500, which is where my localhost. Let me just go to the live server. Whoops. Alright, I'm just going to take this link and I'll open it in Chrome. Alright, so if I go inspect, and you'll notice if I go to application, then we have this local storage here, meaning that some stuff is stored. And let's go to the console. We'll mess around with local storage. So we'll say window.localstorage.setItem. We'll say temp, and we'll say value, like that. So letter for letter, word for word, type that in. and we'll go to our application tab and look at our local storage. And we see that a key of temp and a value of value is stored. So we will go back and we will change this to be a new value. And then we hit enter, and then we go back to application, check what it is. And now a new value is here. So let's reload the page. Right, we reloaded the page and it's still there. So that's what local storage is, and hopefully you're now understanding how we can use that, to make sure that the data stays past refreshes. And even if I think if I close the tab and then open it, Chrome, go back here, let's go to the application, there we go, it's still there even after I closed Chrome. Right, so we're going to be using this to store the data that should go inside. So let's close that, let's move this a little bit over. All right, okay, so to save the row for the future, we need to deal with local storage. And before we do local storage, we need to make sure that we have something stored in local storage, right? Because the first time you open the website, there's nothing in local storage until you actually set some item in there. So the way that I'm going to do that is by checking if there's already an item in local storage. So to do that, it's an if window dot local storage with the capital S dot get item record in quotes equals null, null, and then curly brackets. Then what? So this is saying if this if there is no item called record in local storage, then what we need to do is we need to do window.localStorage.setItem. So if the item doesn't exist, we're going to set it there. So record, and we're going to set the value to a string. So you can only store strings in local storage, so which is why we have to do a little bit of JavaScript magic to make it work. So JSON.stringify, and we're going to give it a JavaScript object, which in this case is just an empty set of square brackets. So this JSON.stringify will convert this into a string, and with that we can save it into local storage, and then when we need it, we'll take it back out of local storage as a string, then we'll convert it back into a JavaScript object, and then we can do our work on it. All right, and if we do have the record existed, so if there is no record in local storage, and if there are records in local storage, what we need to do is we need to go through we need to go to our local storage. So var record equals window.localStorage.getItem record, and we need to convert it to a JavaScript object. So the way to do that is all caps JSON.parse, and then in parentheses all that. And now if we do console.log record, like that, so the first time we run it, we will see in the console we get an array of nothing in it, which is what this empty square bracket is. So we can see that it's working already. Okay, let's check our local storage, see what's actually stored inside. So let's go to, so in Safari it's under storage, but in Chrome it's under application, and then local storage, and then localhost 5050 whatever. And so we'll go to local storage, and now we have a record, and it has empty curly brackets. So if you don't see this, what you can do is right click and delete, and it will remove it from local storage. You can do the same thing in Chrome, and you can reload the page, and if you go back into your storage, it should pop up again if you have this correct. So make sure this is correct. This is essential. You guys probably won't fully understand what's going on here, but just know that we are tossing things into local storage, but in order to do that, we need to convert it with that, and in order to use it in the rest of our program, we have to take it out and convert it back to a usable format. Alright, so now that we have our record, we need to save things to our record. So to save a row into the future, what we'll do is we'll say var record equals what we had up here. So I'm going to just copy what we have, right? And we're going to say our var new record data equals, and we're going to set it as a JavaScript object with a key of data, and the value will be our variable that we have here, right? So this was our data that we got from the form, and we're going to just put that into a new object, and we're going to put that new object record so var, I'll say record dot push record data. So what this will do is it'll put this object into the object that we got from local storage, and we need to resave our new data into local storage. So we need to overwrite what's in there in order to update it. So window.local storage.set item record, and our json.stringify, right, because we need to convert it to a string, stringify our record data. No, sorry, our record. And this is new underscore record data. That was my bad. Okay, so let's see what happens here if I inspect elements and I go and delete my thing here, reload the page. It creates the record, and if I take the quiz and I enter 5, 4, 3, 2 and whatever thing in here, and inspect elements, and we go to storage, the record, now the record should be updated with should look something like this, where you have curly brackets meaning JavaScript object, data meaning the key or colon, and then the value that we have. So that looks good. Alright, so we still have an issue, right, where if I were to take this and open it in a new tab, we're not getting the data, right? So we need to be able to read what's already there in local storage and create table entries into here. So to do that, we'll create table entries with our create table record, and all we have to do now is go through every item that's stored in the in local storage, and we will call this create table record function on it. So to do that, it's pretty simple. To do that, we'll do record dot for each, mind the capitalization, and we're going to do elements, and then equal sign and open, sorry, like an arrow with an equal sign pointing to curly brackets. And what this will do is for every element inside of record, we can run some code on each element. individually. So for each element, I just want to create table record of that element, like that. So if I save it, reload the page, looks like I am getting some weird missed data. So if we go to console, undefined is not an object, evaluating data 0. Okay, so let's see what's going wrong. Let's do console.log element. So if I save it, inspect element, go to the console, we open the thing that was done, and oh, there's our issue, right? So we're not having directly an array, we're actually having a JavaScript object. So we need to do element.data. Element.data. So if you remember, we did the thing here where we created a record by putting it inside of a JavaScript object. So we need to create table record on this, but we were running it on this. So we needed to extract the data from the object, which is where this dot data comes from. So now if I save it, and you can already see on the right, it already set the stuff. So I can go to July 30th, can change some values, I can add some notes, and submit. And it updates. If I reload the page, it stays there. And I can get rid of this, where was it? This built-in table row that I had, and we can just leave what it was there and reload the page, and we're done. So now you've just made your mental health tracker, hopefully. I know this was quite a long video, but hopefully I was descriptive enough and you were able to follow along at your own pace. And yeah, make modifications if you can. So some ideas would be, maybe you can add an X button here that will remove a certain item from local storage. You can, modify the the form that you have here. You can add, if based on the value that you have here, you can color the cell a different color. So there's a ton of things you can add. So just make sure you have this built. You can change the titles. You can ask different questions. You can, add more of these inputs. So yeah, you can really play around with this. You can make it your own, and that's what we're really hoping for you to get out of this. Well, thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and I hope you take what you've learned in Girls Love Tech and you apply it in your life. All right, take care, guys. Whoops.